What would you say has been the best piece of business advice that you've received?
Don't count other people's pockets is something that I've been taught, again, as an interior designer, and you're purchasing products. And it is a lot of times like a sensitive subject or experience, to be in someone's home and they're investing their money and it's a big deal. But ultimately what you can't do is anticipate how much money they may or may not have to put into the project and then potentially edit your profits.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Designing Tomorrow. I'm your host, Mary Beth, and in today's episode, we're going to connect with Mia Whitaker. Mia is an interior designer with over 7 years of experience transforming homes. She is the owner and principal designer at Whitaker Interiors. She's also the communications director of the ASID DC chapter, and she has spent over 300 hours forming systems for her business. In today's episode, we're going to cover creating systems while hiring, the benefit of providing employees ownership and growth opportunities, and we're going to get into the details of the full-service interior design Asana template that Mia has made that takes projects from start to finish. There is so much to cover in this episode, so let's dig in. Thank you for joining me, Mia. I'm really excited to have you today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to dive in. Mia Whitaker, owner of Whitaker Interiors. Tell us how you got to where you are now.
I think that, starting as a kid, I always was into design, constantly rearranging my room and painting a million times, any room my mom would let me. And then I realized as I got through high school that, I could make a career out of this. So I ended up going to college for interior design and getting an associate's, then a bachelor's degree, kind of following that more traditional path. Once I moved to Maryland, which was about 4 years ago, I was looking for a job and I got linked up with a great interior designer. She's a residential designer. Her name's Monica Garrett, and I worked for her for quite a few years and learned a ton. And so that was really what helped me start my own business, was having somebody who was so open to sharing how to do that, right? Like, that's not necessarily something that everyone's open to or everyone, wants to do. So I appreciated that for her. Once I was pregnant with my son, my boss, Monica, had decided to move her family to Virginia. And so we realized that the long distance, 2.5 hours, wasn't going to really work for us anymore. So timing wise, it was great. I went on maternity leave and, she kind of went her own separate way. And then I was, looking for another job and just thought, why not start my own business?
You have a kid and then you start your own business, just about the same, casual. No big deal. So you started your firm after having your son, and you really, it sounds like it was really just an opportunity of, well, I'm not finding something I'm excited about potentially. You had learned a lot from this previous interior designer. So talk us through, I feel like there's always I worked for someone else, or I had this idea that I was going to start my own business, and then I started my own business. But what is that? What did that entail? What did you go through?
Yeah, luckily I have some good friends one of which is a CPA and accountant, and she helped me set up the basics of the business, which are all the legal documentation, the first thing that you need to do, register an LLC, get an EIN number, get a resales and tax use license. If you're planning on selling products. So that's the first thing you do. You register your business name, of course. Always good to check to see, not only is that name taken, but on all social platforms and on websites, right? Is Whitaker Interiors something that's already named somewhere else or taken somewhere else? So that's kind of an important part of starting the business. Make sure you're branding correctly from the get-go. Those are kind of the first nitty-gritty steps. And then, of course, committing to creating some small marketing stuff enough, like a website, right? You need to have people be able to go to a website, have a phone number. Business cards are kind of going out of style, but you have to have, an email that people can contact you at that's professional. So I set up, my Google Workspace with my emails. Those are kind of the first real systems that you got to build before trying to go get a client.
So you did all of this, you set up, you got your licensing information, you got your website, you started forming a brand, you did this before having any clients.
Something that is a flaw, but also like, a blessing in disguise sometimes is that I refuse to just, start something without building the system first. Sometimes it obviously delays you in doing things, but I do believe that it's important to, set it up appropriately. I want to have the right quote unquote answers, right? Like if a client's like, "Oh, I need to email you something," I don't want to say, "Oh, here's my personal email," that I'm sure includes something embarrassing about yourself. So, having something personal separate from the business is important.
I'm sure you're probably not willing to share your personal email that you've probably.
It's not that bad. It's really not. It's just, my full name really is all that it is. It's just also a long email for people to remember for sure.
I love that. I think that there's a bit of credibility and I think just you making that commitment to yourself, like I'm investing in a website, I'm investing in paying for Gmail to have my, special email. I think that's awesome. Sometimes I hear from designers that are like, "Well, I had a project and then I started a firm," and I think that's a really great take of just you wanted to have your systems in place. It speaks to who you are, I think as far as being organized. Okay, I'm curious, just like you worked for Monica. It was Monica, right? Monica before. Was there anything that you took away from working with her that made you go, okay, I want to make sure I'm doing this when I'm setting up my practice or setting up my firm? And maybe things you learned and didn't learn, or wish you would have done differently there that you've kind of adopted in your practice.
Yeah, I think one of the major things I got from her that I was always I always admired her about was she had really strong client boundaries. She was very strict to her scope of work and, saying, no, that's not something we're going to just do for you. I think she was good at highlighting the value of an interior designer. A lot of, what you're talking about when people first start their business, it's kind of like a little hobby and, people want to, "Oh, you're an interior designer, that's so fun." And, they're not necessarily wanting to pay you for what you're worth. And so she was always really great about that. So that was something that I looked to her for. She did that mostly through some of the systems that she had, but she always would outline her scope of work very specifically and then follow that. And if something wasn't on that, the answer was, we can add it, but it's not included. Some things that I learned from her that weren't always set up that I've kind of adopted along the way are, I think I mentioned to you, kind of like our weekly project updates that we do with our clients. That's something I've just learned through the grapevine from other interior designers. Providing your clients with a specific period of time which they know they're going to receive an update from you just ensures that, they're not sitting there thinking they need to call and check on something. They know that every Friday you're going to email them and tell them what's going on. So I'm pretty proud of that. None of my clients ever call me because they don't need to.
That's awesome. So, what would you say has been the best piece of business advice that you've received?
I think that don't count other people's pockets is something that I've been taught again as an interior designer and you're purchasing products and it is a lot of times like a sensitive subject or experience, to be in someone's home and they're investing their money and it's a big deal. But ultimately what you can't do is anticipate how much money they may or may not have to put into the project and then potentially edit your profits to be, more wavering in order to accommodate those things. There's something I've definitely done in the past. Oh, they told me their budget is and so I want to kind of try and fit that in and get them what they want. But in reality, it's their decision to make the investment. All you're there to do is provide them the numbers. So that's something I definitely learned and still still learning, but I try to do.
Yeah. What would you say is like one of the biggest learnings you've had recently? You've been doing this, right, for a little over 3 years on your own, right? Almost four.
Yeah, 3 years
January.
in January.
3 years in January. Okay. So almost 3 years. So what would you say is like a recent learning you had that you're like, dang, I wish I would have known that. And now I know, and I'm going to change my, systems or change the way I communicate because of that.
We used to include a home staging service in all of our full service projects. I wasn't necessarily pricing that in, and I recently did like a profit loss analysis on every project this year and found out that home staging is an extremely expensive service for me to offer. I used to do it because, I wanted the nice photography at the end of the project. But again, ultimately, luckily, we're at the point where I don't need to rely on photographing every project to increase my portfolio. So we've recently taken out home staging as an included service and now have it as an optional service that you can add. Yeah, that being an extreme profit killer for me that I didn't know was happening. But home staging for our business, what that means is essentially bringing in all the smaller pieces, the pillows, the blankets. The artwork is usually tackled, in the design, but like the decor items. So purchasing those items and then installing them for the client. If you think about it, you're taking not only, my time, but my two employees' times for potentially 8 to 10 hours for a day. It's plus all the work to prep to get it there.
What made you go, hey, I should take a look at this? It's easy to avoid the numbers, I guess, and be like, I don't care. I love doing this. I want the photography. But what made you go, I really need to sit down and look at this is, what parts of my services are really making me money and which one should I consider eliminating?
It all started with me, you know, being pregnant again and going on maternity leave, surprise, but not that you didn't already know that. I wanted to build a design calculator for my employees to be able to determine our design fees while I'm gone. Part of that entails understanding how many hours we're working on a project. So when I went down to look at the hours we were spending on the project, I was seeing, those hours being allocated to the home staging section that again, we're just killing our profit for that project or really any project really. So our calculator, how we have it, isn't based on hours, but we base it on a flat fee and then we have an expected amount of hours to work and then a projected profitability based on that. So it's really just a way to ensure that we're pricing accurately and being profitable. And then taking out that home staging was like, oh, that basically fixed the issue of where we should be at. So
Okay, let's talk about team then, segueing into team, because you mentioned you're leaving, you have team, you need your team to be able to do things while you're gone. What's your team structure like now?
I have Kiana, who is now my senior designer. I hired her a little over a year ago as an assistant designer. She's been promoted. She's amazing. She can do anything that you ask her to without question, which is amazing. And then I have my admin Dom, who has been with the team maybe like 4 or 5 months. She's doing great. I throw a lot at her. She's really adaptable and adjusting to all the different things. But she's like the emailer, the scheduler, the organizer. And then in the interim, I've brought on a project support manager who is going to be helping project manage while I'm gone, and her name is Heather. So she will be, not in place of the design, but just in place of the project management that I do and, keeping everybody on track and keeping the projects moving forward.
All right, so you've got three people on the team now. You're hopping off. That makes it sound so casual. You're stepping away for a little bit for maternity leave. You're just gonna hop away and have a kid and come back. When thinking about hiring someone, you're obviously looking at your numbers and you're thinking about like what you're making on a project. How did you decide, 3 years in to have three people? At what point did you say, now it's time for me to hire this person and do I have the budget for it? And maybe you didn't yet, but you were like, in order for me to get the budget for this person, I need to hire them. I'm just curious about your thought process because you're so systems oriented. I can tell that you think about things. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I'm quick to spend money to make money kind of person, and I've heard some other advice, business advice. I haven't necessarily done a ton of research into it, but I feel that it has worked for me. Is if someone can do something 70% as good as you can do it, you should probably outsource it. So it was coming to the point where I wasn't with the project load that I had, I wasn't able to do all the work myself. So I didn't necessarily make a hiring decision on the finance side, but rather on just the project management side. And then as we've moved forward and as the projects have increased and, our bandwidth has increased, obviously the profitability has increased. So it's, kind of a natural, it's just really been a natural thing, I guess. Just feeling like, man, we're kind of overloaded. We're both working way too much when it was just Kiana and I, and then realizing we need somebody to come in and kind of fill that role. Obviously I don't take it with a grain of salt to hire somebody, but it's always worth a shot, right? Like
Yeah.
We're feeling overwhelmed, we might as well try to hire and bring somebody in and see if it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. I think that's part of what small businesses get afraid to do is to make a decision and commit to something. And sometimes that decision doesn't work out and maybe you have to go backwards a little bit, but you're not going to know that it's going to help unless you try. So we kind of take that approach on the hiring side of things at least.
Yeah. Did you have solid systems in place when you hired Kiana on the team?
So Kiana was my second employee that I had. I had another employee before Kiana that worked with me for about a year or a year and a half. I really built my systems during that first year, year and a half. Trying to kind of like coach and train that person and get them into the right spot. Ultimately, after building the entire system and then thinking that it was me not providing enough information, realized that maybe just we weren't the good fit. So I built the systems in order to be able to delegate, to somebody else. Ended up being able to delegate it to Kiana and Dom as they've come on. So the systems were mostly in place, but as you hire a new person, there's always something because you're changing who's responsible for what you're reallocating the work.
Okay, I just have to say, not every designer that I've ever talked to who's 3 years in is so, like, all about having a process and a system. Like, the fact that you even did that with your first employee, business owners in general don't do this. I mean, there are companies that have existed for 40 years, and they don't have anything written down about who does what. So, what made you think this way? Like, was there a book that you read? Were you born this way? Like, how did you just like somehow being like, I'm going to start my business and I'm going to build all the systems?
I think that I've always kind of taken on that role no matter what job I've had. I worked in restaurant industries for a long time and it was building the back end systems for tracking, our quantities of liquor, like restocking, or I've always kind of like been into efficiency, so that's important. But I think it's truly like the only way that I can work. Like I can't move forward unless something is like written down and there's clear next steps. Yeah, I guess just a personality thing. Something that ended up being very advantageous for being an entrepreneur, which I never grew up wanting to start my own company. But again, just kind of ended up falling in my lap and seeming like the right thing to do.
Well, you've clearly nailed it. You're working on it. You're always improving. I think one of the things you mentioned when you were kind of giving us the intro here is that you in high school decided that you could make a career out of interior design. Was there a special program or a person in your life that really made you realize that was possible?
I went to a high school that like if you were the cool kid, you were in AP classes and you were super smart. So always striving to kind of be like educationally advanced. But I was in an AP art program, 3D and 2D and drawing and all kinds of different stuff. So just being exposed to kind of the creative side of things really helped me, kind of make it more obvious. We did have some interior design program that I went through where we did some kind of drafting and stuff. So yeah, there was kind of definitely some exposure there.
I feel like in my high school, we had graphic design, a full on graphic design course that you could take. And I went through that and I was like, oh, I'm really good at this. Oh, this is easy. Oh, this is fun. Oh, this is a real job. So I feel like for me, I got to experience that in high school. So it's so important that you get that exposure to not just creative fields, but I think anything that's possible. I love that you at least had exposure to that and it sort of led you to that. Okay, I also want to talk about before we like transition, we're kind of in the middle of all these systems discussions, but I want to know about your approach to sustainability. I know you write about that on your website, you write about designing responsibly. So what are, the practices that you have and how do you ensure that you keep that on your team?
Yeah, I think there's, quite a few different ways to approach sustainability. Some of it comes into, the materials that you're using. The materials obviously are affecting, the indoor environmental quality. So in order to understand that, you need to align yourself with like the correct vendors who are either, manufacturing responsibility, using third party ratings are kind of an easy cheat code to like making sure something is sustainable. So we utilize those. Some of it has to do with transportation. So, getting your materials from one location to another, where are you sourcing them from? How long are they taking to get there? And is there a way to reduce, that transportation? That's also part of it that people don't necessarily think about. Other part of sustainability is longevity. So we really focus on designs. Like, I think the best designs are the ones you can't tell when they're done. I can't tell that this was done in 2000 or the 1920s, the 1980s, or 2024. It's just, being able to have pieces that are good quality, that design wise don't fall too hard into trends so that, in 5 years, this person doesn't want to, discard of that item. So, from a design perspective, it has to do with, you know, using some classic things, and then the things that are more trendy you can bring in that are smaller, have less impact if they want to replace in the long run. Like, paint is always a great way to update without much waste. So yeah, those are just some of the key, like, few things that we do. The other thing that comes into play are, in general, your recommendations for the project. So obviously, if you're coming in and recommending ripping everything out, everything that's existing could potentially go to waste. And or if you have a plan for those items or a place to donate those items to in advance, are always a good option too.
I love all of that. Have you been thinking about operating in this way and sort of sourcing in this way from the beginning, or is this something that you've kind of learned about as you've, felt more responsible as you've sort of your practice has grown?
So actually, when I went to get my bachelor's degree, I got a focus in sustainability. So it was kind of ingrained from me from the beginning that, designing, it is a big responsibility. The built environment is so large, and so when you're responsible for editing that built environment, I think it's important to consider, what your impacts have on not only the planet and the people, but it also does have to do with profitability as well. So it's a good intersection, I think, not only from, like I said, that standpoint, but from a business standpoint, it's important to think about sustainability.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, it's not always the first thing that a designer is going to talk to their client about. Hey, are we going to make this project really sustainable? Oh, let's not tear everything out. So, how do you approach that with clients? Do you have that conversation with, your clients about that being part of your practice?
I think if it comes up as like a sticking point, maybe between a recommendation that we've created or made for them, that we would explain the reason for doing this is X, Y, and Z. I don't think that sustainable design practices have to alter the client experience very much. People think that, from a price point perspective, it crazy increases things, maybe 10, 20%. But again, if you're looking for full service interior design, you're kind of looking for a luxury service to begin with. So it's kind of just all wrapped in with our estimating that, I'm not like, hey, here's a non-sustainable option. Then if you want the sustainable one, is 20% more. I don't actually really give them that option. It's just like, hey, if you want to purchase a product like this through us, this is what it would cost. And this is kind of my ideas and my recommendations. I think that hiring an interior designer is like purchasing art from an artist, right? Like, either you value their look and their design and their process and personality and what that all means, or they're not really a good fit for you. So ironically, it's not something that comes up very often with clients. It might be kind of a marketing thing that they see and appreciate, but for the most part, I don't get a ton of questions about it.
Awesome. If there are designers out there who aren't really thinking about this and don't have these, practices of identifying vendors and thinking about transportation, which I thought was a really great point, what might you share to encourage them to think this way? Is there anything tactical they can do to start pulling these practices into their work?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's not necessarily a key motivator for someone to focus on, again, you go back to like what sustainability really means, and it does mean what's best for the people, the planet, and the profits. So if you're a business owner, considering sustainable options could save you, for example, on, freight or something, considering, reducing the different types or locations that you're ordering from for a project. An easy place to start, like I said, is utilizing those third party ratings and kind of understanding and identifying those, little circles or little triangles that you see online. There's obviously a lot of greenwashing out there. So Although something seems sustainable doesn't always make it. But there's a red list out there that you can find. Buildinggreen.com is a great resource if you're looking for sustainable materials. So I would just say start somewhere small, you know, start with maybe one item that you want to kind of focus on being more sustainable, or one material would be a good place to start. Like, hey, I know that, you know, fabric is like a big one, right? Or upholstery or rugs or something. So I want to get away from something that's going to, have VOCs, and what can I replace? What is one material that I can kind of replace slowly through my process?
Today's episode is brought to you by Materio. Materio is an all-in-one visual project management system for interior designers and design build firms. If you are struggling with managing project details and invoicing across 4 or 5 systems, then you need to check this out. You can learn more by going to www.materio.co and signing up for a free trial. I love that. I think that's great advice. Start small. Start to look at, one segment of products that you're sourcing, and then go from there. Okay. Now I'm curious. I feel like you would have some thoughts on this. And this is really a question I've been grappling with as I've talked to a lot of designers recently. So as a designer who is, who's gone through the traditional, I went to school, I learned interior design in a formal way, I practice under someone. How do you feel about the many self-taught designers that are out there that may or may not be competing for your work, but there's a lot of people and there's certain states where you can say certain things. Do you have thoughts on this? Is this controversial or is it just me?
No, I think it can be controversial with interior designers. I'm the communications director for the American Society of Interior Designers, the DC Metro chapter. So some of the things that we do, include advocacy around interior design and ensuring, that there are certain things in place that you can call yourself a certified interior designer or work in certain states. I do think it's important. I think the difficulty with some of it is drawing the line between residential and commercial. So a lot of times those certifications or those requirements are really focused on commercial, and so they can be limiting to a designer that's residential that is capable of being a certified designer. I don't particularly see a huge issue with a self-taught designer. I think if you have the skill, you have the skill, and no matter how you want to learn, whether that's through the traditional format or through experience or through YouTube, which is, basically college. Anybody can go to college on YouTube.
You heard it here.
I think it comes back to the responsibility of these certifications being um, accurate enough that residential designers, again, specifically being in the residential field, that more people are encouraged to take the test, right? Like one of the requirements for the NCDIQ is to either have a bachelor's degree or to have a sponsor and to work under another certified designer for like 3 years, right? Some of these requirements don't allow, self-taught designers to be certified even if they are capable. So I think that some of the requirements are kind of silly, to be honest with you.
Well, it sounds like there maybe should be more opportunities for those people who didn't take the traditional path to become certified. I think that's a great answer. I was just curious because I feel like there's been some back and forth, and we have a lot of self-taught designers on the platform who are doing huge projects and lots of work, and
Yeah.
I was just curious. Okay, so we've talked about how you hired people onto your team. You've been systems oriented from the beginning. We've also previously in other discussions talked about this Asana template that you have. So I want to know, let's dive into that. Why did you create an Asana template? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So for the people who don't know, Asana is essentially a project management platform. And so as an interior designer, there's a bajillion tasks to do, right? And it's just finding the right software that fits for you. I think personally for me, Asana has the tools that I need, and it's complex enough but also simple enough that you can utilize it as a single person and as you grow, right? I think that's important because some of these systems you get into and it's good while you're a one man shop, and then you have no way to share it and expand it. So what I built throughout the past 2.5 years, and specifically focused in that first year and a half, was Every time I had a process or every time I had a system or something come up that I needed to document, I started to slowly document it. And as a full service interior designer, you go through many different hats. You're not only a designer, but you're also procuring products and ordering products. And then you're also project managing contractors. So, kind of identifying those different types, of tasks and slowly starting to build them into a system is what I've been doing for a long, long time. And now I want, to work towards sharing that with other designers, um, just to give them a head start, right? Like, you don't have to spend 300 hours like I did building my system. I think that interior design is one of those fields that it is a lot of, individual run businesses, and there aren't as many resources out there to understand how to do it the right way. So
Yeah.
there's more and more out there too, which is awesome.
Yeah. So you consider yourself a full service interior designer. You're making this template for full service interior designers. Anybody else that can make use of this template?
Right now, we have a pre-built construction and furnishing template. So, say you're doing a kitchen and a dining room, that could take you through the whole process. We have a furnishing template. So, if you were just doing a living room, it could take you through that. And we are slowly working on an hourly template. So, if you weren't a full service interior designer, you could use the hourly template. But it's definitely geared towards full service interior design because it is a pre-built process, right? Like, if you are not doing full service interior design and you're doing one-off consulting, it's harder to follow a process for one-off consulting because it depends on what you're consulting about.
Sure. Sure. So talk us through like where does this template start? Maybe that's seems like a silly question, but for those listening, like where does it start and where does it end?
It starts with pre-hire. So for us, our process is the first thing is a meet and greet, right? And that's a 30-minute, non-commit call, just kind of see if we're the right fit for you. There's no real need to include that in the template. After that, our first thing is a paid service. It's an initial consult. It's 2 hours. So that's where the template starts. The template starts once someone books an initial consult. The Asana template or project gets made for that client. We're filling out their client profile. We're going through the whole pre-hire phase, walking through contracts, invoicing, our recommendations. And then at that point, once the client hires on, the template continues. Obviously, there's the possibility that you get through the pre-hire phase and you go no further. It doesn't happen very often, but the project and the process for that template starts there. And then it ends at the end of the project. So there's a final email, in there, final internal wrap up things, ensuring that you're adding them to your client gifting list, all kinds of stuff. So
If someone is, you mentioned full service interior designer for this, how would a designer know? Okay, I mean, this again may sound like a dumb question, but for those listening, how would they know? Okay, I'm a full service designer. This template is for me. I should look up, Mia's template and reach out to her about using it.
I do think it's important at a minimum if this is something that you're interested in getting, it would be one, you're kind of struggling, with next steps or, keeping a process or just staying organized, of course. Understanding if you're a full service interior designer would mean for us, again, you're building everywhere from the concept to the design to the procurement to the project management of the process. So if you're a designer that doesn't necessarily procure furniture or procure items, not necessarily the template for you. I do encourage that they have some experience in Asana to utilize it effectively. It certainly can be overwhelming if you get in there and you've never used Asana. So, someone that knows Asana, fairly decently, or at least a beginner that has used it in the past, and then, someone that is following kind of those 4 steps for sure. That would be the person that would benefit from this process.
Gotcha. Okay, so I know that you use Materio because we're Materio, and that's how I know you. So you're using Asana, you're using Materio. Are there any other systems that you're using, and people can expect to learn more about in using your template and learning your process?
For Some of the things that we mentioned throughout are, our use of SketchUp is our, 3D modeling software for floor plans and elevations. We utilize a rendering software called Neo that is also discussed in there. We utilize Canva, just like everybody else, as our platform to build our presentations. So that's in there. And then really our like back end system that holds all of our documents and organizes us is Google Drive. So it's interlinked with the Google Drive as well.
It still sounds like a lot of systems to me, but you mentioned this is like when we chatted before, this was like the least amount of systems you've ever used in your process. So, talk to us about how you like, let's get tactical and like talk to us about how you use one system to the other, which I know can be hard to say out loud, but like at what point do you start using SketchUp and how are you translating that into Materio, into, XYZ?
I think that we have to, again, understand as an interior designer who's doing full service that you are playing and doing so many different jobs. So, the multiple systems I think is always going to be a thing. Every company needs somewhere to store documents, right? Most companies utilize something, whether it's Google Drive or Dropbox or Microsoft or this and that. Even the biggest companies in the world are going to have some sort of place to store their items. They're always going to have somewhere that they're doing project management. They're always going to have somewhere that they're doing invoicing. I know Materials working towards tackling a lot of those things, which has, significantly reduced the quantity of tasks that we have to do outside of Material. So I think the best way I can look at it is really the template itself and each software, the percentage in which we're using each software, right? Like some of the softwares we're only using 5% of the time. You need them, but you're not using them all of the time. So we're spending a lot of our time in Material because it's doing our invoicing, it's doing our portal management for our clients, it's doing our estimating, it's doing our approvals for our clients, as far as capturing each individual product approval and the specifics of those and the visuals around that. And then tracking, right? So we're doing tracking in there as well. So there's a big portion of the tasks in the template that are either in Material, and then the other tasks just being kind of like the big day to day of like emailing somebody or building a presentation. So from
Yeah.
one to the next, the template will follow you through to which software to use.
Mia's like, go look at the template because I'm not going to describe every step for you. You're like, I've spent 300 hours doing this.
It's hard because you switch back and forth. So
Yeah, I mean, I get it. And two, I think the one thing to remind folks is that like these systems and processes and even picking up your template, like you're most likely going to evolve, right? Like your systems are going to be continuing to evolve. Your team might find things when you're out on leave that you come back and they're like, hey, we could optimize this. Like that's the
yeah.
kind of people that you want on your team anyways, right? People who are looking out for the whole system. I think going back to one thing you said at the beginning, you had mentioned when you first came out and you're working for Monica, she was very open with you about the business and like the process and how things work. I imagine, you've set up this template. It sounds like kind of to one is just because so you can be organized, but the other is like you can step away again and you can leave and be with your family and they can run, your business. They can even start new projects without you. So I guess I'm wondering like, do you also take the mentality of if I can share and embed my knowledge with my team, not only will they run my company effectively for me when I have to step away, but they'll be better designers because of it. Like, are you intentionally sharing with them, and how far do you go? Like, how far do you feel comfortable sharing? Are you like, hey, we're not making, we're making money or we're not making money? Like, what's the threshold there?
I try not to like stress them out about the details, but as we've even built like this design calculator I've talked about, I've been like, hey guys, you remember such and such project? Like this is like kind of where we ended, and like these are why I'm kind of doing what I'm doing. So they're cross trained on a lot of things. They're not necessarily expected to have certain responsibilities, but anybody on my team is fairly aware of every part of the process, whether that they're responsible for it or not necessarily, but I do take that very seriously when I hire. and why I'm, particular about who I hire because I do share so much. I have no problem, I don't think that everyone's going to work for me forever, right? But I do ask that my employees are kind of like open about where they want to see themselves next. And I'm very open about like, what are you enjoying about your job or not enjoying about your job? Because if we're ready to open up another position in 3 months, let's outsource the things that you don't like, right? Like, why would we
Right.
continue to have you do a job that you don't particularly like? And that's the same thing that I do as a business owner. I think what people forget is sometimes to like treat their employees, in the same manner, right? Like, I'm giving up responsibilities that I don't want to do anymore, right? And we're outsourcing those. And so as your team grows, how can you outsource the things that they don't appreciate as much or maybe see themselves being better at, right, than we originally anticipated. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of how I structure it.
I think that's like, first of all, just wise of you. Kudos to you for being wise and understanding. I think that there's a lot of wanting to hide things from your employees. I hear this a lot. I don't want them to know like how profitable we are because then they'll know that they're getting paid, X amount, but I'm billing out this much for them, and I get that can be touchy, but I also think that it sounds like you're handling this really well and just going, what do you want to do? Let's help you grow. Let's help you get there. Are there any specific business books or podcasts or any coaches or anything you've listened to gain this wisdom? Or you just happen to be a very wise human?
No, no, I mean, I'm definitely constantly listening to books, to podcasts. I've listened to Atomic Habits. I've listened to The Happiness Advantage. I've, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I've done, all the self-help books, business books, and kind of taken bits and pieces from all of them. I think that's kind of, you know, where I've learned a lot of this. A lot of this I've learned just from like psychology, some of the psychology stuff that I've read is just understanding, like you're right. It's like some of these huge companies that have been around for 40 years. It's like, why don't you know to invest in your employees more? And I think part of it comes from the knowledge of being on the employee side for so long, right? Like being like, man, if you guys would just give us this, like I would be so much happier and I would want to work here so much longer and so much harder. And so just, you know, knowing that that's the case, right? Like if you provide, it's not going to be universal, but if you try to provide your employees happiness and, appreciation in their role, they're only going to work harder for you and be happier and make you more money in the long run. So it is really just kind of a an obvious thing for me. But yeah, if you ask my wife, I'm always listening to some book. I really really liked The Happiness Advantage. That was a really good one.
I love that. I saw something the other day and I don't even remember who said it. I can't remember if my husband sent it to me or somebody sent it to me. It was like one of those reels on Instagram or something. And it was like a guy, I should know who this is. It was a guy and he was saying, well, I have like male CEOs coming to me all the time going, what's the ROI on investing in my people? And he's like, and then the women actually listen to me. The women don't have to ask that question. They know that investing in their people is going to make a better business. And I was like, yeah, duh. Like why why are we questioning that? And so I'm all for it. I think that, you're correct and your intuition is correct and I believe in it as well. Like if you take care of your people, you make them feel happy at work. Like they're going to want to work for you and want to make better. A lot of people don't want to start their own businesses because us who do are crazy. We're
Yeah.
sometimes the oddballs. I think with design it happens a lot because that just becomes the path as a creative person of wanting to put your vision and aesthetic out there. But not everybody is made for that. And I think that if we just don't believe everyone's trying to steal something from us at every moment, then the world can flourish. So I love
Yeah.
that. I'm glad you do that. What was the book you said you definitely recommend? The Happiness Effect?
The Happiness Advantage, I can look up. Yeah.
Happiness Advantage. I haven't read that one. Okay, I need to read that.
It kind of just comes down to like everybody's so focused on goals, right? And there's a difference between systems and goals, right? But everybody's so focused on goals all the time that they put their happiness, in the back seat. And then the whole book just kind of talks about how that's such a reverse, just such a reverse role than what it should be. Like if you make it the same thing with your employees, right? Like you put your employees' happiness, at the forefront, then they're gonna work harder for you. And same thing for yourself. So if you're constantly, trying to, hit that next goal and do that next thing when you're never happy, like you'll never reach your goal. There'll always be another goal. So it's by Sean
Yeah.
Acker.
Okay. Awesome. Everybody hear that? We're going to write that down and make sure we read that if we haven't already. Okay. One thing going back to, your employees, and you mentioned them not necessarily being responsible for certain things. I'm curious. I mean, on my team, I definitely have this where each person over each department has metrics that we go over every month. We want to make sure that they're going well. They are responsible for those numbers. Like, do you have any KPIs or numbers at your company that you do require your designer or your admin to be responsible for that you kind of keep track of?
This is kind of one of the newer things that I'm looking at as a small business. Like I said, is that profit loss per project and employees being more responsible for the hours that they're putting into each project. Again, like if you talk to my employees, I don't care when they work. They work full time, cool. They need to be available between 10 and 5. If they want to work at 6 a.m. and stop at 1, that's fine as long as if I need them, at 4 o'clock, they're available. So when it comes back to that, like they're allowed to work whenever they want, but it is important to understand the level of time that they're putting into each project and caring about how that affects the profitability of the company. So I have started to make them more aware of we've spent X, Y, and Z time on this, and then it sometimes evens out. But it is important for them to feel responsible for tracking the time spent on a project. So that's kind of like a newer responsibility or metric that they have to start to keep in mind. Other than that, I mean, I really don't. I mean, I have certain like requirements, like, certain things need to be responded in within a certain period of time. Leads need to be followed up within a certain period of time. So there's those kinds of like metrics, but nothing where they have
Yeah,
to say, hey, this month, I had 50% this and 20% that. So
sure.
nothing like that at this point.
Yeah. How do you ensure, like, do you have certain check-ins where you're like, or do you just randomly check in, okay, the email came in and Dom got back to it, within a certain time frame? Or is there a moment you'll sit down together and you go, hey, let's just check in on like how's response time? Are you feeling like it's good or bad? I don't know. I'm just curious for business owners out there who aren't even thinking about this. Like, what can we do to encourage everyone to check in on those numbers and give people responsibility if they, makes them feel good?
Yeah, so we have like a weekly overview every Monday at 11 that we spend an hour and we all bring our updates. I think that Asana is how I track most of it. Outside of the template, we utilize Asana and many other factors. So the template itself is for a client project, but outside of a client project, we have boards where we track all of our other tasks that aren't like project specific. So for leads, for example, a client, an employee will pull the client information in, and there'll be a task in there, and I can see and watch the employee complete those tasks, and I can track and see how long it took that employee to accomplish that task. So we're able to kind of talk about those things on the weekly update. It does require me to go in and check, or at minimum ask like, "Hey, I saw that lead come in. When did you get back to them?" Blah blah blah. So
Yeah.
utilizing more Asana.
Awesome. Okay. Speaking of Asana, back to the template, when can everyone expect to be able to purchase this template? When is it coming to the world?
Yeah, I think we're going to probably fully launch it when I'm back from maternity leave sometime in March. We've started kind of like a soft launch with testing it out with some designers that I've met through my business coach and kind of getting some good feedback, making sure that it's kind of the best version of what it can be. Again, as you know, and I know being a perfectionist is not always the best thing, but we want it to be as good as possible before fully releasing it.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so sometime in March, most likely, doing some early testing. If you are interested in testing it, I guess find Mia and email. Well, don't find Mia because by the time this is out, you'll be on leave. Find her team, email them, and see if you can get access to that template. Okay, I feel like we've talked about a lot. This has been awesome, but I have one more question for you, and I didn't I didn't prepare you with this one. I'm sorry.
Okay.
If you could write a tagline for yourself in 5 words or less, what would it be?
Okay, so I have a tattoo,
Okay.
and it says, "You are your only limit."
I
And
love
it's
that.
it's not my own saying. I didn't come
Yeah.
up with that. I found it on the internet, just like every other girl who wants a tattoo. But kind of around the self-help stuff and everything I've always been into. I think it's so true. I just think that like really it's cheesy. But whatever you put your mind to, right? Like you can accomplish it. So
Yeah. I've told people about this book. I feel like I mention it all the time. Have you read The Big Leap?
no.
Put it on your list. Maybe not
Yeah.
when you're on leave. I don't know. But it's like all about limiting beliefs. And I feel like if that is your tagline, then you have to read that book. So definitely check that one out. I feel like this has been awesome. I feel like we have so much more that we could talk about. We're going to do, let's just say it and put it into the world. We're going to do a second interview once you're back from leave. Once we've got the template into the world, I want to check in on that. I want to talk to you about how it's going, get people engaged in it. So, but thank you. Like, thank you for spending the time
Yeah.
with me today and chatting through your process and all your good advice. So, all right.
Yeah, you're
Anything you want to
welcome.
ask me? I feel like do you want to ask me anything before I leave?
Now that we're done, you have your option to ask me something.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that, I'm sure you guys will chat about material a lot. I know that there's a lot of cool things coming out about that. So I'm looking forward to seeing those new updates, those templates,
Yes.
is what I'm looking forward to seeing. So
Thanks for joining us, everyone. If you liked today's episode, be sure to comment below about what you liked most and what your biggest takeaway was. Until next time. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Designing Tomorrow. This podcast is brought to you by Materio. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave us a comment below about what you thought.